2 years ago, West Ham fans were celebrating one of the most memorable nights in our history, in our modern history, when we became champions in Europe by winning the Europa Conference League on the 7th of June, 2023. Those days in Prague will live long in the memories of every single West Ham fan, I'm sure. And I look at the squad that we had back then and believe that we had actually a squad of players who seemed to be really one unit, who fought for each other and really worked well together. Aaron Creswell, Thomas Soucek, Soufal, Fornals, Lanzini, Ben Rama, Jared Bowen, Mikel Antonio, and of course, Declan Rice all contributed to that season. And they also helped to settle in some of the new boys that we got that season as well, the likes of Gianluca Scamacca and Lucas Paquetá. And as much as our league form wasn't great, our European form was superb. Not one defeat leading up to and including that final in Prague. Now, all right, I know a lot of fans are going to say, well, we didn't have anyone of worth beating. But to be honest, come on, we still had to play games. We still had to beat the teams in front of us. Not one defeat in that season in Europe is a major success. But 2 years later, we kind of find ourselves in a very, very different situation, don't we? Now, look, if you're new to the West Ham Boys, or if you've watched the West Ham Boys before, but yet to become a subscriber, please do subscribe. Costs nothing to subscribe. All the content is free. And if you enjoy this video, please do hit the like button at the end of it. So we had that success. And then, of course, in the summer of 2023, we sold Declan Rice for a record fee of £105 million to Arsenal. All profit. And yet we hear 2 years down the line that we are skint and we've got to sell players in order to buy players. Now, how have we gotten ourselves into this mess? Quite simply, we're in this mess because of the continued mismanagement of our transfers well before winning the Europa Conference League in 2023. And this goes as far back as probably when we left the Boleyn right up to the present day. In that first season at the London Stadium, we spent circa £80 million on players. And then it was a mishmash of player purchases, which included weird loan signings, free signings, etc. And it was just it just didn't seem to be the right approach to take after having a fairly successful last season at the Boleyn. Now, in that first season after the Boleyn in 2016, our biggest player purchase was Andre Ayew. We spent just over £20 million when we brought him from relegated Swansea. But as I've said, the rest of those players was a real mishmash. We got in Simone Zaza, Jonathan Kaleri, Gökhan Toure, and free players such as Sofiane Feghouli, Harvard Nordtveit, Ashley Fletcher, and Alvaro Arbeloa. Instead of building on what was a good season at the Boleyn, final season at the Boleyn, we squandered our chance to do so. Now, the biggest player that we sold in that season, that first season after the Boleyn, was, of course, Dimitri Payet, who left in January 2017 to go back to Marseille. So that first season after the Boleyn was not great. We went into the 2017-18 season hoping for something better. We spent £50 million on player purchases, but this time we managed to sell more than we spent, with around £57 million of players leaving. But the players that we got in included the likes of Marco Arnautovic, Joe Hart, Chicharito, João Mario, and free transfers of the likes of Pablo Zabaleta. That seemed okay on paper. Out went the likes of Andre Ayew, who we actually managed, ironically, to get this almost the same money back for him as we bought him for. We even made money on the likes of free players such as Nordtveit and Ashley Fletcher, who left. But Bilic didn't really do much better, and we found ourselves calling in David Moyes for the first time to stem the relegation slide. But our lessons in how to manage transfers were actually about to take a turn for the worst. In came Manuel Pellegrini in the summer of 2018. And he had a completely different approach in his philosophy to playing football to that of Bilic and Moyes. And he went about spending money as if it was going out of fashion. In the summer of 2018, we were celebrating spending £100 million on players. And if you recall, we brought players in like Felipe Anderson for something like £35 million, 22 million for Issa Diop, 18 million for Andrei Yarmolenko, and so on. But despite this massive spend, the players that we sold amounted to no more than £10 million in the transfer market. So we spent 100 million getting players in and only got rid of £10 million worth. You see the trend that our transfers were going, even back then. Pellegrini did okay-ish in the first season, and the board, because of that, decided to back him again in 2019, where we spent a further £110 million on player purchases, with the likes of Sebastian Haller, Pablo Fornals coming in to complement the already overinflated squad that we had. But again, our expenditure overshadowed the sales, with just £50 million worth of players going the other way. But again, halfway through that season, Pellegrini's second season, we had to yet again call upon David Moyes to save us from relegation. But when Moyes arrived in that winter, he actually spent a bit of money quite wisely on two players who have since proved to be key for West Ham over these past 5 years or so. He spent £18 million on Jared Bowen, or £19 million on Jared Bowen, and £4 million on the loan signing of Thomas Soucek. I, for one, really started to think that when we finished that season, really started to think that maybe we might find ourselves doing a lot better in the transfer market than we had done over the previous few seasons. And in the summer of 2020, we made the loan signings of the likes of Said Benrahma and Thomas Soucek. We made them permanent, as well as adding Vladimir Soufal, Craig Dawson, and of course, Jesse Lingard to our ranks. We started to bring in more what seemed to be more solid players, players that could actually deliver. In fact, in the summer of 2020, we spent a modest £50 million on player purchases, and we sold players for around 40 million. I thought, okay, here's a balance coming. But by this time, our transfer expenditure was already way out of control. In the 5 summers from the window from 2016 to 2020, we had actually spent £390 million on players coming in against £200 million on players leaving. £190 million overspend already. But just when I thought David Moyes would bring a balance to how we managed our transfers, it changed direction yet again. I'll never forget Moyes stating that he would spend the club's money as if it were his own. And yet almost immediately after saying that, he allowed players to leave for a fraction of the price that we've paid for them, and thus losing the club yet even more money. Sebastian Saller's short time at the club cost us over £20 million alone. But there was worse to come. And in January and in the summer of 2021, under David Moyes, we bought big again, spending £30 million on the likes of Kurt Zouma, 26 million on Nikola Vlasic. But yet again, another huge loss was realised over, I wouldn't have even called it a sale, of Anderson, where we lost virtually every penny that we spent on bringing him to the club. And in the summer of 2021, there wasn't a huge spend overall in comparison to other summers, but we still spent in the region of £70 million on players, and we sold a mere £4 million in sales, player sales. And then in the summer of 2022, with another David Moyes infamous interview, He stated that because we did so well, got into Europe, etc., he stated that we had entered a new era of player transfers. And the things, if we thought were bad enough, really did go into overdrive. In that summer, we spent £40 million on the likes of £40 million plus on the likes of Lucas Paquetá, 35 million on Gianluca Scamacca, 30 million on Naifa Gerd, 18 million on Maxwell Cornet, and 10 million on Thilo Kehrer. And of course, the £10 million player that David Sullivan gave to Moyes in the winter of that season, Danny Ings. So the 2022-23 season saw us spend a staggering £180 million on player purchases. And players leaving, 15 million for Diop, a loss on that money. We made about £1 million on Craig Dawson, I think, maybe not even that, when we sold him for £3 million. We actually managed to recoup a total of £20 million in player sales, £180 million purchase, 20 million in sales. But having said that season, we realized the European trophy and all the income that brought with it. But this time, it did feel as if maybe, just maybe, we might build on that success. Yet, in the summer of 2023, we saw the departure. Yes, in the summer of 2023, we saw the departure of Declan Rice. We knew that he was going to go, but it looked as if we'd started to spend the money wisely. And of course, we started to praise the inbound Tim Steidten for having helped to oversee some of our better transfer business. In came Mohamed Kudus, Edson Alvarez, James Ward-Prowse, to name but a few. Overall, the spend again was in the tune of £140 million in that summer. But despite the huge profit we made on Rice, again, we lost a huge amount of money on letting Gianluca Scamacca go for less than what we bought him for, Nikola Vlasic for less than what we bought him for. And later in that season, we saw the loss of Pablo Fornals and Said Benrahma, again for less than what we bought them for. But I guess for those players, Fornals and Benrahma, at least they gave us a good couple of decent seasons, whereas Scamacca and Vlasic, we didn't really get the best out of, did we? Now, thankfully, because of the sale of Declan Rice in that season, for once, we actually recouped more money than we actually spent. An inbound amount of £160 million in total. And then we come to the season that's just passed. Yet another manager, well, two in fact, and yet completely different footballing philosophies, meaning completely different needs to the types of players that are wanted in the squad. And Julen Lopetegui arrived, and with Tim Steidten alongside him, they managed to spend £140 million again on what looked like a mishmash of players. Kilman, Soler, Rodriguez, for a combined total of 40 million. But of course, Kilman was the one we spent 40 million on. Soler was a loan signing. Rodriguez came for nothing. And some would say that those players were Lopetegui signings. And then, of course, there were the Steidten signings of the likes of Fulkrug, Guilherme, Todibo, Wan-Bissaka, all for a combined total of about £65 million. And then, of course, the obligatory Sullivan present of Somerville for about 25 million. Last summer, we spent another £140 million in player purchases, and this time we only sold about £40 million worth. So in all the 9 summer transfer windows since we left the Boleyn, 18 transfer windows in total, we have spent no less than £920 million in player purchases. That's players we brought in, players we've loaned, free signings, etc., etc. And in that same period of time, we've sold or we've loaned out players to the tune of £485 million. So the trend in losing vast sums of money on players has continued for nearly 10 years. Let's not forget, I'm only taking into account player purchases and player sales. I'm not talking about other costs such as wages, not taking into account other income such as TV money, season ticket sales, and so on. This is just about the mismanagement of players purchased and sold, which has made a massive contribution to the mess that we're in with PSR today. And all this is really down to not just the managers who bought and sold these players, they do have an element of responsibility, but it's all down to David Sullivan and the West Ham board for allowing this to happen under their watch and for not having a clear strategy since taking over the club all those years ago. The board have had so many opportunities to get it right at West Ham, but most attempts seem to have been kind of half-hearted, to say the least. The first time goes back to when Pellegrini was appointed manager and he brought in with him the director of football, Mario Husilos, and we thought that maybe there would be a consistency in the kind of players we bought and sold. But that turned sour and Sullivan resumed control of player purchases. And more recently, when we thought that the board had finally seen the light, in order to try and emulate what other clubs were doing around the world, around Europe and in the Premier League, when we assigned Tim Steidten as our technical director. But again, despite Steiden's shortcomings, the board looked as if it was a bit of a half-hearted effort to bring Steidten in. And of course, we know how that turned out. And yet again, David Sullivan took over the control of transfers. In the end, really, Steidten became just a glorified salesman for West Ham, great at closing a deal, but no strategic direction as to where the club was heading on a footballing level. The idea was to give West Ham a focus so that no matter who was managing or coaching the team, there would be a consistency, a consistent identity in the style of football, hence bringing in similar players so that that consistency would happen. But it didn't happen. It was more what we've done over the years has been more on the whims of each manager. This manager wants this type of player, so goes out and buys a whole squad of players. The new manager comes in, a different approach, so a whole squad of new players. And I said in a previous show recently, we seem to be continuously rebuilding our squads every summer because of the change of direction that we've been taking. And here we are now, about to enter we've entered. The transfer window has already opened. Our 10th summer transfer window since moving to the London Stadium. And have we progressed? I'm not so sure that we have. Yes, we've won a European trophy. And as I've said in the past, I'm not so sure that we needed to move stadiums to do that. We've tasted European glory in our history, in our past, as well as domestic glory as well, by winning domestic trophies. When we were still at the Boleyn. And I guess the only success that we've had in the new stadium has just been, the Europa Conference League. And if the new stadium is to be realized as a major step in the right direction for West Ham, then of course what we're looking for is emulating winning domestic trophies more regularly and of course getting into what we were promised, the false promise of being in the Champions League. Now, winning a domestic trophy and getting anywhere near Europe, let alone the Champions League, seems to be, miles away at this moment in time. Now we have an array of talented players who simply don't seem to fit into Graham Potter's ethos and thus facing the prospect yet again of having to sell the likes of Mohamed Kudus, maybe Lucas Paquetá, depending on what happens with his FA hearing, Edson Alvarez, and many others at this time. And hopefully we will sell players in order to generate enough money so that Potter can rebuild a squad to his liking. But what if or when Graham Potter leaves West Ham? What then? Where do we find ourselves again over the next year or so if he leaves? Well, let's hope that if he leaves, we don't find ourselves having to rebuild another squad under another manager. Let's hope with the investment of bringing in the likes of Carl McCauley and Max Hahn overseeing transfers in the background, that there is a future steady progress on the type of players that we get in. And if Potter leaves anytime soon, we bring in a similar type of manager who's going to have a similar type of philosophy so he can keep that continuity going. But I'm not so sure that's ever going to happen, because whilst Sullivan is in charge and his flimsy way of managing this football club, if Potter doesn't succeed this coming season, I think we're going to find ourselves yet again having to rebuild another squad under another manager. West Ham, only this club can do it in the spectacular fashion that we do. If you've enjoyed the video, please do leave your comments at the end of it. Do become a subscriber, and please do hit the like button as well. Thank you for watching and listening, and I'll see you all soon.